I have the pleasure of interviewing Yiwen Li. She is a principal of Alumni Ventures, one of the most well-known and active venture capital firms in Silicon Valley and in the world. And she has been making huge waves in the world of women empowerment with her book, Make the World Your Playground, which was a bestseller in China. And that is some of the topics we're going to talk about here. And so the top three takes that we're going to get from this interview are how VC and the world in general, in terms of business and many other areas of our life, are changing towards the representation of women and people of color. And next, we'll talk about the world of women in Web3 and how we can shift the landscape for innovation, which is something that really is valuable and important to me and to many people who are going to be listening to this. And finally, going beyond these simple explanations and commonly accepted answers into complex problems when it comes to creating meaningful change in the world. So Yiwen, welcome to Titans Up Today, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob, for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. My name is Yiwen Li. I was made in China and got my education in Europe. Actually went to school in London School of Economics and University of Vienna, studying economics, and then started my first job on Wall Street at a company called Capital Group based in LA. That's how I came to Los Angeles as an analyst on the public market side. And then worked at NantWorks, which is a holding company for a biotech entrepreneur and billionaire. Did a lot of healthcare investment. And currently, as you mentioned, I'm a principal at Alumni Venture. We're a very active fund, manage over $1 billion, have over 1,000 portfolio companies. As a principal, I support a blockchain-only fund, looking at Web3 blockchain only, but also a general fund investing in ecosystem of UCLA innovation ecosystem.
Outstanding. Now, you've accomplished a lot in your life, as you've just covered. So what are the things that you're most proud of that you have done to date?
Good question, and thank you for the kind word. I think, as you mentioned, and in our previous discussion, I actually wrote a book. It's in Chinese, so the audience here cannot read yet. The name of the book is called Make the World Your Playground. I'm very proud of the book, mostly because my co-author is my mother. So the book is talking about how two generations of Chinese women view life similarly and differently through career, marriage, growth, and to find their own path. That book had caused like waves in China, especially resonated with young Chinese women and their mother, and encouraged them to find their own unique path. Because my career and life path so far is by no means very straightforward. But I'm pretty happy where I'm now. And I hope everyone, especially women nowadays, can find their unique path. I'm very proud of that. Also proud that early on, and this is relevant to our topic, in the kind of crypto blockchain innovation wave, I've co-founded with some very good co-founders, something called LA Blockchain Lab in 2017. So collectively, we start to build the blockchain innovation ecosystem early in the kind of the last boom of blockchain, and has been since very involved in the space.
Amazing. And yeah, the feel-good element of writing a book with your mom, that is powerful. And I can imagine the sort of impact that would have on people. And so what was some of the reception that you got from that? Obviously a bestseller, but were there some amazing stories that came from that, people who were able to find their path and sort of things of that nature?
Yeah, that's interesting. So my mom and I did actually a book tour throughout China. I'm originally from Wuhan, now a city that is very famous around the world. So we started doing the book tour in Wuhan and then went all the way to like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, the large metropolitans. And it's just surprising how many people that actually found our book and came. And mostly it's the daughter and mother both came. So that was very unique. One of the kind of interesting story is that by just me and my mother having a dialogue on stage, having a dialogue between mother and daughter, it actually facilitated continuous dialogue between mother and daughter, like all around in the country. We discovered that there's actually a lack of communication between parents and their kids, especially mom and daughter. There's always like an interesting dynamic. And by having a very open dialogue and talking about things differently, it actually helped the communication between like within family. As Chinese parents like are famous for being tiger mom, really want their children to have a good education and being into certain high earning kind of career position, similar like to India. Like a lot of Asian countries, we want our kids to have a good earning job and have a stable life. But I think the core of my book and my mom's support is just follow your passion. Is a very American way of looking at life. And I think, fortunately, I think that younger generation Chinese also are more free now to pursue their passion, be it music or dance, or I don't know, invest in blockchain. It doesn't have to be always go to a large corporation and climb the corporate ladder.
Wow. We could talk about that the whole time, but we'll get into some of the next questions. That is just really powerful. And hopefully we can have that sort of open dialogue here when we get into some of these subjects later down the rest of this podcast. So you've been, as you mentioned, deeply immersed in blockchain for longer than most have known that it has existed. So many of the entrepreneurs and investors, people I talk to, they always come back down to the fundamentals. So what are the fundamentals in your eyes when it comes to building a great blockchain company and what it's doing in the world, of course, as well?
I think that's a really key question. Yeah, I got into this space in 2015 and created LA Blockchain Lab 2017, and now fully investing in blockchain. I see that the space went through a lot of ups and downs in the past 10 plus years already. Definitely see it attracts different type of participants into the space, from the very early like nerds to 2017. There are some scams, there are some ICO bubble, to now it's more institutionalized. More people from Wall Street and from Silicon Valley really dedicated their career into the space. So definitely see, despite the volatility, the space is maturing. I think the building blocks are, from a technical perspective, is the fundamental blockchain technology itself, meaning what we always talk about, the layer one infrastructure, right? As we know, there are different type of blockchain, starting from the blockchain that Bitcoin transact on, to Ethereum, to Solana, to Avalanche, and now to like recently Mysten Labs and Aptos. There are just like different waves of innovation of how to actually break the trilemma of blockchain, which I'll explain. The trilemma of blockchain is coined by Vitalik. It basically means that you can only suffice 2 out of the 3 main benefits of blockchain, which is decentralization, security, and scalability. You cannot suffice all 3 at the same time. A lot of the challenges that we still see as today, even after Bitcoin started in 2008, so that's 14 years now, we still see the challenge of high gas fee, low transaction speed, congestion on chain, even like on Ethereum, right? But I think as we see more and more innovation and high quality people coming into the space and build, the fundamental layer one infrastructure is maturing. And hopefully when we reach a point where the gas fee is really low, it actually makes sense to transact cryptocurrency on chain, it can settle instantaneously, then we will see the real mass adoption happen. And I think we're maturing into that phase. So I think layer one is the fundamental building block. The people who are the talent are fundamental building block. And then of course, building on layer one, your scaling solution, the layer two, and your dApps, the layer three, those are the ecosystem that could be built and scale on top of layer one.
So we're going to go a little bit out of order here, but that was really impactful. And it sparked a question I was going to ask later, is how do you tackle that then, or go at that to capitalize on that with that perspective as an investor, knowing those sort of things?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's interesting. I was just talking to some investors today before our interview. It looks like investors are looking, and I think it's just VC in general. We always looking at like different waves. For example, like 2017, a lot of people invested in ICO. People made money, lose money. Like DeFi summer, when DeFi is a new concept, people VC and retail investors invested in DeFi protocols and yield farming. Last year, a lot of people invested in gaming and metaverse. And then I think this year, most of the VCs, including myself, realized the fundamental technology maturing. That is a major trend, especially that happens during a bear market. So a lot of people are actually looking into infrastructure, layer one, scaling solutions, infrastructure for gaming, infrastructure for DeFi, compliance for DeFi. So I think we're at a bull market. People's attention is very human. At a bull market, you want to invest in something that is like fun, that is entertaining, such as gaming and metaverse. But in a bear market, I think it just pull us down to the ground and say, you know what, we really have to start from the basics to make this fundamental technology more scalable in order for mass adoption. So I would say infrastructure is actually a real area that attracts a lot of investor attention this year in this cycle.
When that happens, does that change the time horizons and the sort of objectives in terms of returns that investors are looking for? Are they becoming more, maybe they seek higher, faster returns, but then it comes back down, it's more reasonable. Hey, we're looking at this infrastructure play over the next 5 or 6 years, that sort of thing. And are those elements coming into play, or is there still, hey, we're getting in this technology and that time horizon, the return still stays relatively the same?
Yeah, I think time horizon is really a deciding factor between speculation and investing. There's definitely a lot of speculation in Web3 and blockchain investment, just let's be very frank. But I think real good investors, fundamental investors, will see that there is a boom bust cycle, whatever subsectors you're investing in. I think I got your question is, okay, if you invest in like metaverse or gaming, do you get like liquidity faster than if you're investing in infrastructure play? I don't really see it that way, because I think one of the challenge and advantage of investing in blockchain is that there is a relative faster path to liquidity because of the coin issuing, and you invest in equity and SAFT. So that happens regardless whether you invest in gaming or metaverse or you invest in infrastructure, because the coins on top of the ecosystem, it's necessary no matter what subsector you invest in blockchain. Now, I think a lot of the speculative factors with the coin price being removed or in the process of being removed during a bear market, just because a lot of the money has left. The patient money and the money that still stays in the market become more selective and focus on quality. So I think the liquidity is still there, but the money is become more selective and more patient, just to summarize.
Absolutely. There was a graph, and meeting with entrepreneurs, some people are like, there's just no money and the VCs don't have money. And there was a graph that came out, some data, I think it was from CB Insights. There's more dry powder than ever. And this was August-ish. It was about 652 billion in dry powder. And it's okay, so there's no money. And actually the fact is there's a ton of money, but like you're saying, it's being more selective. It is looking for better opportunities. Are there any other, to connect two things here? So we know infrastructure is important, right? Because that's what's going to be there 5 years from now, no matter what, when the infrastructure is solid. But how are you seeing, to go back down to the fundamentals and to change the angle a little bit, is how do you look at DAOs or the other elements of Web3 and how they are fundamentally going to change the way people operate? Do you believe, for example, that DAOs will change the way that companies, that will become the operating system of the future, which is something that's hard for me to wrap my head around, but I'm always open to the real world, right? The real world ultimately decides how things go. So what are your takes on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the attractions that bring me or draw me into investing in blockchain and building in blockchain space is that this fundamental technology is doesn't just impact one aspect of our life, right? If you look at aspects that blockchain brings in, changes in, there are technical level, there are financial level. For example, DeFi kind of disrupt the TradFi, the centralized financial system. And if you look at the cryptocurrency, it's its own system in parallel with the currency system. Now with DAO, it's a new way of organizing people and a new way of organizing governance. That's why I think this technology is so fascinating. It brings a new way of looking at all different aspects of our lives. It also brings more like inclusion, includes more people to have access to a system that they probably cannot access before, like people who has bad credit scores, people in Africa or in developing country don't have access to their like centralized financial ecosystem. I think that I'm a little off topic. I'll come back to DAO, but I wanted to say DAO is interesting because it's part of a way that blockchain making changes to our lives, not only financially, technologically, but also socially and from a governance perspective. Now, coming back to this topic of, do I think DAO will change how corporation actually organize and how people are investing? I think the answer is yes, but not now. I think DAO is still very early. Like I'm looking into several DAOs or even like participating in some DAOs. I think the governance of a DAO is still very fluid. People are still trying to figure that out. Like DAO, like the decentralized autonomous organization is a concept, but how do we actually govern a DAO? Like how do we distribute the profit within the DAO? It's not clear, at least not now. And I think the way it make real change in the world probably is like a couple years out when we figured out how there could be a way to govern DAO first. Whereas if you look at how VC works and how corporation, LLC, like partnership works, is very clear. There are rules, there are compliance of how it works. I think we're still at a very early stage of DAO as a new way of organizing people and distribute benefits.
I have to let that one sink in for a moment. Yeah, because when I look at corporations, you see the outliers. Let's talk about the outliers, people who drive tremendous amounts of value. Some of these guys are right back here. So
yeah,
the way I look at it, like those processes are not always democratic when it comes down to the high level decision making of a company. And that is because, hey, that person is probably 99.9% more immersed than everybody else into what they're doing. And they're seeing something that other people aren't. So I can't remember where I saw this, but it was like the DAO was marketing itself as the wisdom of the crowd. And I think it was at one of the platforms that allows people to create DAOs. And I would agree with you with what you said entirely, but this said, hey, tap into the wisdom of the crowd. But then I watched an interview, it was actually Tim Ferriss and Rolf Bata of Sequoia. And he said something, this wasn't about DAOs, but he said, you can't rely on wisdom of the crowd. And we know this in like investing in the financial world, right? Especially trading and things like that, because you'll always revert to the mean if you rely on wisdom of the crowd. So that's where it breaks my mind. How do you then still create those outsized gains, the outliers of value, trying to rely on the general person to make the right decision?
This is really interesting. We can talk for a little about this, Jacob. I know we have a list of questions to go through, but this is more of a philosophical question, right? It's almost like, how do we argue, is this a better society if it's democratic based, or is it one decision maker based? If you rely on one person or a small group of people making decisions for the rest, it might be more efficient, but then when it's right, it's very right. When it's wrong, it's very wrong. If you rely on a more kind of participation of opinion, like we're talking about DEI, then it's a de-risk process, but it takes longer. So I think there's always a trade-off between efficiency and equality, more philosophical. Now coming to DAO, and you mentioned the wisdom of the crowd, I think the key question is, how big is that crowd? It cannot be billions of people. We survey all of them. And of course, there are different education background, different ways of thinking, different like people's life experience are different. So that would be too broad. So the key is this maybe is the wisdom of a small group, a wisdom of a small crowd. You almost have to control like the number of the crowd that discuss within to not sacrifice so much of the efficiency. I think in large tech companies, like for Google, for example, like I think people will break into smaller groups for discussion, for innovation. So I think that kind of group size is actually very interesting, and it's normally like a overlooked area when we're talking about how to make decisions.
Interesting. Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it will take, as you were mentioning, as the world develops in terms of DAOs and other things like that, it will take a lot of philosophy testing, just getting out there and seeing what happens and what produces results.
Yeah, that definitely. I think that's not only for DAO, it's also for even for layer one. Like, how do we think about consensus mechanism? Okay, POW is where it was born, and there was a lot of criticism of like high power consumption and not being environmental. So now Ethereum just closed the merge and getting away from POW to POS. But then does POS bring in more centralized problem challenges? Is that a perfect mechanism for consensus? That's also a philosophical discussion, I think, in a way. And I think we're still evolving. It took a couple decades for internet to be adopted. We're 14 years into blockchain. So I think it's still very early.
Is there anything that you would say is missing from the world of Web3? Something that maybe knowing the fundamentals of blockchain you potentially see as something that could be, but it's not yet?
I hate to say this because it doesn't sound very crypto native, but I think it's regulation, really. Because if we're thinking about blockchain not just as a technology or the space for a few, but for mass adoption, in my opinion, I think number one, for mass adoption to happen, the fundamental technology has to be better. That's where I start with layer one infrastructure. Still, there's a lot of innovation to be done there. The technology has to go from dialing in internet to a broadband internet for people to actually use that to write emails. So I think that technology innovation is there, but it's still not quite there. So that's one missing. The second, as I mentioned, regulation is because there are a lot of people made money in blockchain, but I think a lot of people lost money in blockchain as well. There hasn't been like a protection for the retail investors.
SIPC, the Securities Investment Protection Corporation, is in for securities in, let's say, stocks and everything like that.
Yeah, and I think this is a debatable topic, right? Because I think fundamentally the community is against central government, against centralized compliance and everything. But like recently, I went to several conferences, from consensus to compliance panel is actually one of the most well-attended panel. And you can see that like senators, government officials, and the speakers are from very high level of government thinking about how to regulate this space and protect retail investors. And I think only when that is in place, and probably America will be the first country, I shouldn't say that because there are different regulations. Yeah, across the world, like Singapore, Middle East. It's going to be interesting to see how different government and jurisdictions view this industry differently, because it is direct to retail. And whenever a asset class that is direct to retail, there always will be a component of speculation and outsized return and outsized loss. And it will inevitably trigger government reactions of how to regulate that. It's just different government probably have different philosophies, and that will dictate where the crypto and blockchain community goes. But I think America is doing it just from an objective perspective, slower, but probably more methodical.
Absolutely. No, that is just a very good insight. To give some weight to this, I just saw a bill, I think it came out last week, that has proposed changes to ERISA, ERISA, which is the Earned Retirement Income Security Act. And the last time there was a change to ERISA was when the boom of venture capital began. And that allowed pension funds to invest into venture capitalists. And now it's even bigger. number wise. I'm not exactly sure, but it's pretty huge what's going to be coming next potentially. And that is the opportunity for all these, let's say, 401ks to invest into those same people, venture capitalists and angels. And so that would unlock $7.6 trillion worth of value, which can be placed into these more risky investments. And it is the balance to bring it both what we just mentioned in the previous topic, the merge. There's some individuals that I know who have said that this is a major regulatory event. The merge is actually allowing people like the SEC or FINRA or whoever to get more of their hands involved in this. And because it's all about who has the money at this point, who's holding the funds. So yeah, curious your thoughts on that. So since that to me is an absolute game changer, is the change to ERISA that is proposed on top of what you're talking about.
Yeah, having worked in like one of the largest asset manager, like capital group, manage money for pension funds, that's where I see regulation is really important, because pension directly relate to every individual's ultimate wealth, and when they retire, that's what their money is relied on. So I think risk control within how to invest in pension and 401k money is even more important than just invest in your disposable income. I do see that there are companies already allowing individuals to invest their pension fund, their 401k money, to buy Bitcoin. I don't know whether that is for retail or for accredited investor only. We can talk about a lot of kind of philosophical questions about who should have access to riskier asset class. Because I think one of the problems the world facing is the disparity between the rich and poor. And one of the reasons the disparity is increasing is there are assets that average investors don't have access to. It's only open to accredited investors or when the investor has certain assets. And the reason of that is some of these assets are inherently more risky. So it's a trade-off also between access to a riskier asset class to like higher profit, like risk appetite. Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance of how do you allow retail investor to have access to asset class such as cryptocurrency, alternative asset class, but also protect their interest, just because they don't have some of the resources that accredited investor has to, for the lack of a better word, to make a better decision.
Mm-hmm. Could go on that one for a long time, for sure.
I know it's very nuanced topic, and
Yeah.
I think coming back to your previous question, I think that's why regulation is important to, on one hand, give access to retail investors so that they can benefit from this rising asset class, but also provide protections, especially when people are investing their pension money into this asset class. Absolutely. I think related to that, also education to lawmakers are very important. This space is very technical. It involves so many aspects of our life. I think a lot of people from the regulator side are also trying really hard to understand. Only when they understand first, then I think the regulation would be more sensible.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned maybe America will be first, but when I talk to people from all over the world, there's a spirit of competition that is in Asia, that is in India, that is in China, that they're the up-and-comers. Investors that I've talked to have said, hey man, you have people from 4 a.m. to all the way at night who are just working in China. And how does that spirit of competition, what's been your personal experience of that spirit of competition? Is it different in the different places that you've been to, the places that you've traveled or lived? And how important is it for us to keep that competitive spirit and keep things moving forward?
Okay, you're talking about that not just in a blockchain sense, but in general, like entrepreneur. Okay, got it. Yeah, definitely good question. I was born and raised in China and Asia and lived in Europe and now working in America. It's a very good question. I think definitely there's more it's the truth that there's just more competition in Asia, in countries like China, India, because there are just too many people. Like even when I grew up, to get on a bus to go somewhere, you have to able people. Otherwise, you can't even get on a bus. Just so many people. There was a lack of resources. and oversupply of people. In that environment, you naturally become more competitive. Sometimes I joke with my friends. I was like, I'm less competitive now in America because everything it's so nice. I don't really need to eyeball other people to get on a bus. And to zoom that out for a little bit, I think in Europe, that's probably even more so because it has a certain wealth level and social support system so that people live more comfortably. And does that lead to a level of loss of competitiveness? Might be, but is that a good thing? It come back to, do we want to be happy or do we want to progress always? So that's another kind of philosophical discussion. But I think just compare between America and Asia, I think America is still very competitive, especially in terms of innovation. There are a lot of things that I think America has that other places still hasn't catch up yet. The education here, the venture ecosystem, the out-of-box thinking, those are still, I think, very important that America still have. People are working very hard in other parts of the world. And I think innovation and entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem is becoming more and more important in every country. So I think it's yet to see who will be the leader in innovation in the next couple years, the next century. But I think for now, America still have a lot of advantage in that regard.
I'm very pro competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, competition is amazing. So yeah, side note there. But so let's see, how do you define your purpose and what really drives you? I want to connect this into main takeaways, but how do you define your purpose?
My purpose of life.
Yes, with your day-to-day, with the things you're doing. Why do you do what you do? What drives you?
I think it comes down to personal happiness and making an impact in my community and in larger society. Yeah, so what drives me is to learn and grow every day and knowing that what I do could make a small benefit and make the world better, even in a tiny little small way every day. And that personally, I'm growing every day in even a tiny little small way. So I think growth and impact, that drives me.
And then what about the women of Web3 and women empowerment and those sort of things as well?
Yeah, good point. I think the first time you and I talked, we spoke about that. I think diversity, inclusion, and like women entrepreneurship, women empowerment is the topic of the year, but especially in blockchain, I think that the gender ratio is probably 90% to 10%. I think it's because the industry is technical and a lot of capital involved. It naturally attracted a lot of nerds and capitalists, but definitely seeing increasing group of women, both on the building side, entrepreneurs starting company side, as well as investment, that women making more investment in this space. There are also women in blockchain, Web3 women communities blossom these days. So I'm very optimistic there will be more women, more diversity in this space.
Are we taking the right steps to truly have an impactful change over the next 50, 100 or plus years? I know it's hard to say a yes, we project out that way, but are we doing the right things that will? Because I think at a real level, this is a data that will change over time. This is right, a long-term thinking thing, but are we taking the right actions? And if not, are there other actions that we could take societally in general that come from your experience and how we could influence this change?
You mean change in terms of bringing more people in, more diversity and women into the innovation ecosystem?
Absolutely, yes.
I definitely think we're on the right direction, right? There are more public boards having clear requirement to having at least one women board members. There are also, I think, funds or companies that index themselves on how diverse and how many women or like underrepresented communities that they hire. It's also part of the impact investment movement where you invest in companies that perform higher in those type of index. So I think there are a lot of things happening both on the regulation side as well as just a social movement side that emphasize DEIs and women leadership. I definitely think that is a long process. It's not that today we have regulation, women has to be on board, and then everyone go out to hire women. I think it's a fundamental change of thinking that diversity can bring in more different perspective and improve investment results, improve performance. There are numerous research shows that women investors think differently and women-led fund deliver a superior return, or the environment that has more diversities has better performance. I think we have objective data to back this movement, but it still takes time for the thinking to change, to realize that diversity, inclusion, and women would actually benefits to the end results. I think only when that change really kick in, then we'll bring more diversity in a big way.
Because we're all engineering for a result, whether you're an investor, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're engineering to achieve the goal, whether that be an exit, whether it be an IPO or what have you. And just keep it within our world here. And so one argument that I previously had bought into, and I think we talked about this on our first call, was it's a supply problem. And that is, there's just more men going into tech and more men going into these more technical fields. Do you believe that, to bring in your economics experience, there is a supply or demand problem on either side of in the whole picture of things? Or does it just come down to what you just mentioned, more people realizing that, hey, if we're engineering for this result, we should build our companies in this way?
Probably we have a little bit of both. I think the second part, the mindset change is happening, and there's more empirical data backing that. Now, the supply demand, I actually think, I don't have the data right now. We can look into the data. I do think the education level for women is increasing across the world, and there are more women going into STEM, more women engineer, more women in the technical field, more women in the investment space. I think the challenge, and this has been talked many times, is that it's not a lack of women in the workforce or in the field that need women. It's a lack of leadership. There are actually reasonable representation for women in mid-management in large companies. But if you look at the CEO level, the C-suite, the management level, that number changed dramatically. It's still dominated by men in the management level. So I think that's where change needs to happen.
Got it. Very good insight.
And it's not, I think the top management level might have more of a supply demand issue, because if you don't promote women all the way to the top, then there are less women have the relevant experience to be the CEO, to be the C-suite. So I think that is a problem we do need to tackle, that women promote women all the level, not only just to a certain like mid-level and then stop.
So to close it all off here, and I know we could probably have 100 podcasts together just off all the depth that we've.
Very philosophical,
Yeah.
Jake. I don't know whether this is where you want to go, but I think a lot of our discussion is less investment, technical focus, but more like philosophical. Just the nature of this blockchain that evolves so many different aspects of our life.
Because it comes from a deeper level, right? It's okay. Sometimes you have to go higher level. You have to change the thinking on the top before you can ever make a meaningful impact. So I'm glad we got to have this sort of discussion. But if there are any key frameworks of thinking, you mentioned one, your personal way you live is make a bit of an impact every day, learn more, and just be happier every day. Is there any other frameworks of thinking that we as entrepreneurs and investors can take into our lives from this moment forward that can help influence a result, the positive results you want to see in the world?
One thing that I've learned, really important thinking framework, probably not have a direct impact of results, but more in your personal happiness. And I think personal happiness is very important for entrepreneurs because it's the most difficult thing to do is to be an entrepreneur and choose to create a company from 0 to 1. Every day I wake up, I talk to entrepreneurs, I just get inspired by them. But a lot of them struggle with stress. It's a high stress environment. So I learned to be grateful every day, grateful for the little things that I see, grateful for the plants here, the sky, the fresh air, the little things that makes you smile on a daily basis and just keep thinking about the things that we have, but not always plan on the things we don't have. Was to keep happy in the pursuit of happiness is important.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure having you on the Titans Up Today podcast, Yiwen. Everybody who's watching, you can find her on LinkedIn. Anywhere else we can find you, Yiwen?
Yes, I'm, of course, being in crypto. I'm also on Twitter.
Go ahead. I'll drop it in the description as well of the video.
Yeah, okay. It's Van Moon Cat. Very crypto native. I'll send it to you too.
Awesome. Thank you again. And everybody, please can subscribe and we'll see you in the next interview.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
You're welcome.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up Today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.